The night air was heavy, like it knew something was about to break. Glenn sat on the edge of the bed, his back turned to me, tossing cruel words into the room, like he was throwing garbage into the street. I stood there, numb, the taste of cheap wine still burning at the back of my throat from dinner. We were supposed to be celebrating our anniversary. Instead, Glenn had drunk too much and said something he couldn't take back. You're just cheap, Dolores. Always have been. Acting like you're something you're not. The words hung there, heavier than the air, heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I stared at his broad shoulders. Once a place, I thought I could rest my dreams, and all I felt now was an aching emptiness. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't even argue. Something inside me had already snapped so quietly that even I barely heard it. I walked past him without a sound, grabbed my purse from the dresser, and headed into the small bathroom. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, breathing. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. Everything felt strangely still, as if my body already knew what to do next. In the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized. I used to smile so much that strangers would comment on it. Now my lips barely knew the shape. I pulled open the medicine cabinet and started gathering my things. My toothbrush, my tiny bottle of lavender perfume, the little jar of night cream I bought after saving up for weeks. All of it went into my purse quietly. I didn't need much. Glenn had made sure of that. When I walked back out, he was passed out on the bed, one shoe still on, his phone dangling from his hand. I moved silently. I wasn't about to leave anything behind that could tie me to this life. This mistake, the photo frames on the dresser. I opened them up, slipped out the photos, and stuffed them into my purse. The gifts he had given me, the cheap jewelry he would later brag about. I tossed it all into the trash can. Even the silver bracelet he gave me last Christmas, the one with my initials engraved on it, went into the bottom of the bin, under empty beer cans. My phone buzzed lightly in my pocket. It was Shannon, my oldest friend. You okay? Want me to come? Get you? I stared at the screen for a long second, then typed back, give me 10 minutes. Don't knock. Just text when you're outside. I tucked my phone away and went back to cleaning up every trace of myself. Glenn always said he loved how little space I took up, how easy I was compared to his exes. I realized now what he really meant. I was disposable. I wiped down the surfaces I touched. I deleted every photo of us from my phone, from my cloud, from every account I had. I deleted every text thread, every voice message, every stupid meme we sent back and forth. He wasn't going to get to scroll through and remember me someday. No late-night drunken texts asking where I went. No, I miss you, calls 3 months later. I was erasing myself. Glenn shifted on the bed, mumbling something, but didn't wake up. Good. It would be easier this way. No goodbyes. No explanations he didn't deserve. I looked around the room one last time. The apartment was ugly and beige, just like our relationship had become. There was nothing here for me anymore. My phone buzzed again. Outside, it was Shannon. I slipped out the front door, careful not to let it slam, and stepped into the cool night. The air smelled like rain, like change, like freedom. Shannon's car was idling by the curb, and Thomas was sitting in the passenger seat, twisting around to wave when he saw me. I smiled, a small tired thing, and hurried over, my purse clutched tightly in my hands. You sure about this? Shannon asked. As I climbed into the back seat, I nodded. I'm sure. Thomas reached over the seat and handed me a coffee. Got you your favorite. 2 sugars, no cream. That tiny gesture. That tiny bit of kindness nearly broke me. I pressed the warm cup to my chest like a shield and whispered, "Thanks." As Shannon pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. There was nothing worth seeing behind me anymore. The drive was mostly quiet, except for the soft hum of tires against wet pavement. I sat in the back, cradling the coffee, feeling its warmth seep into my cold fingers. Shannon kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror, her mouth tight, like she wanted to say something, but didn't know where to start. Thomas, usually the loud one, said nothing too. It was like they both knew that anything they said might break me open. The city lights blurred past the window. I stared out at them, feeling like I was floating somewhere between who I used to be and who I might become. Part of me wanted to cry, but the tears just wouldn't come. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I had already cried everything out long ago. In all those arguments where I let Glenn win, just to keep the peace. Shannon's voice broke the silence. "You can stay with me for as long as you need. No rush." I nodded, grateful but not ready to speak yet. My voice still felt locked in some small, broken part of me. Thomas turned around in his seat again, his dark eyes soft. "You're not alone, Dolores. You know that, right?" I tried to smile, but it felt stiff and foreign. "Thanks, both of you. Really." Shannon's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a brick building that smelled like old wood and clean laundry. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, safe. She had a little wreath on her door, a homemade thing with crooked ribbons and tiny fake flowers. I stared at it for a second when we got there, feeling a weird lump in my throat. "Come on in," she said, pushing the door open. Inside, everything was cozy and messy, in a way that felt lived in and real. There were books stacked on the coffee table, a half-finished jigsaw puzzle spread out over the dining room, a cat curled up asleep on the couch. Shannon grabbed a spare blanket from the closet and tossed it over the back of the couch. "You can take my bed," she offered immediately. "I'll crash out here." No way," I said quickly. "I'll be fine here." We went back and forth for a minute before I finally won. I didn't want to disrupt more than I already had. I set my purse carefully by the arm of the couch, like it was something fragile. Honestly, it felt like the only thing I owned now. Thomas lingered by the door, clearly unsure if he should stay or go. He looked at Shannon, then at me. "If you need anything at all, you call." "All right." I nodded again. Words still weren't coming easy. After he left, Shannon sat down cross-legged on the floor in front of me, her eyes serious. "You don't have to talk about it," she said. "But when you're ready, I'm here. I wanted to say thank you, or you're the best friend I've ever had." But the only thing that came out was a broken little laugh. It startled both of us. I covered my mouth immediately, but Shannon just smiled gently. "It's okay," she said. "Laugh, cry, scream, whatever. You survived. That's what matters." I sank back into the couch and stared up at the ceiling. The exhaustion hit me all at once, like a wave that had been waiting to drag me under. My body ached in ways I didn't even understand, not just from tonight, but from months, maybe years, of carrying everything on my own. For a while, Shannon just sat with me in the quiet. The only sounds the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional creak of the old building settlings. I didn't have to pretend here. I didn't have to be easy or cheap or low maintenance or whatever other version of myself Glenn had tried to mold me into. Here, I could just be. At some point, Shannon must have gotten up and dimmed the lights, because I drifted off into a restless, dreamless sleep under the soft glow of a single lamp. The blanket smelled like her, fresh laundry and cinnamon, and I clung to it like it could keep me from falling apart completely. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waiting for someone to yell at me. I wasn't bracing for the next cruel comment, the next slammed door, the next insult dressed up as a joke. For the first time, I felt the edges of something fragile and terrifying, freedom. And even though I was scared out of my mind about what came next, a tiny stubborn part of me whispered, "You're going to be okay." Morning came slow and pale through the small window above Shannon's couch. For a long time, I just lay there, watching the light crawl across the ceiling, feeling the stiffness in my muscles from sleeping in a tight ball all night. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of the coffee machine sputtering in the kitchen. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. Everything felt distant, like I was waking up in someone else's life. Then the memories caught up with me. Glenn's voice, the cruel words, the cold goodbye I gave without speaking, and the familiar ache set back into my chest. Shannon popped her head out of the kitchen, her hair a messy halo around her face. "Morning," she said softly, holding up a coffee mug. "You want some?" I nodded and got up, the blankets slipping from my shoulders. She handed me the cup without a word, and we sat at the little kitchen table, sipping quietly. The coffee was strong and a little bitter, but it warmed me up from the inside. "What's the plan for today?" Shannon asked carefully after a few minutes. The plan. I hadn't even thought that far ahead. Last night, all I could think about was getting away. Now that I had, the blank space of what now loomed bigger than anything. "I guess I need to find a place," I said, my voice rough. "A job. Something." "You can take your time," she said quickly. "You don't have to rush." But I shook my head. I couldn't sit here and drift. That's how I ended up stuck with Glenn for so long, waiting for something to change when all along I should have been the one to change it. "I'll figure it out," I said, trying to sound stronger than I felt. Shannon nodded, not pushing. "Thomas might know of something. He's been doing some work at that bookstore on Main Street. They're hiring part-time." A bookstore. The thought made something small and tentative lift inside me. Books had always been my escape before life caught up with me and made dreaming seem childish. "I could do that," I said, more to myself than to her. She smiled relieved. "I'll text him. You should eat something first, though. You're running on fumes." I managed a real smile then, small but real. "Only if you don't make me eat one of your weird health smoothies." Shannon laughed, the sound brightening the whole apartment. "Deal. Pancakes it is." While she cooked, I wandered over to my purse and dug through it until I found my old notebook, the one I used to keep tucked away under my pillow. It was battered and creased from being dragged through a dozen almost forgotten plans. On the inside cover, in faded ink, I had once written, "Build a life you don't need to escape from." I ran my thumb over the words slowly. Maybe I hadn't failed completely. Maybe leaving last night was the first real step toward making that life. The apartment smelled like pancakes and butter. Shannon was singing off-key to a song on the radio. For the first time in months, my heart didn't feel like it was trapped in a shrinking room. When we sat down to eat, Shannon's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and grinned. "Thomas said to come by this afternoon. He'll introduce you to the owner." Something inside me tightened at the mention of Thomas. He had always been kind. The kind of steady presence you didn't realize you were leaning on until you noticed how much you missed it when it was gone. Glenn used to mock him sometimes, calling him too soft or pathetic. I realized now that Glenn just hated anyone who showed kindness without strings attached. After breakfast, I showered and pulled on a clean pair of jeans and the softest sweater I had. It wasn't much, but it was what I had. Shannon handed me a hairbrush and a little bit of mascara from her bag. "Just enough to feel like yourself again." she said, giving me a wink. I brushed my hair until it looked almost decent, dabbed a little mascara on my lashes, and took a deep breath in front of the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one from last night. She wasn't whole yet, but she wasn't broken anymore either, as we locked the apartment behind us and headed downstairs. I felt the weight of every step. I was walking into a new life, shaky and uncertain, but mine all the same. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel like I wasn't enough. Main Street buzzed quietly under the afternoon sun, the kind of lazy, golden warmth that made everything look softer. Shannon parked a little crooked in front of the bookstore, and we both sat there for a second, staring up at the small wooden sign swinging above the door, Page Turner's. It was charming in an old, stubborn way. The paint was chipped, and one of the windows had a crack running through the bottom corner. But there was something real about it, not fake, not polished, just standing there, like it didn't care what anyone thought. "You ready?" Shannon asked, turning toward me. I wasn't, not really, but I nodded anyway. "Yeah, let's do it." The bell over the door jingled as we walked in, and the smell of old paper and coffee hit me like a memory from a better life. Inside, it was a maze of shelves and tables piled with books. A couple of people wandered the aisles, their heads tilted sideways, fingers brushing along the spines like they were touching something sacred. Thomas spotted us right away. He was standing near the counter, laughing at something the man behind it had said. When he saw me, his face lit up, and I felt a weird, unexpected flutter in my chest. "There she is," he said, walking over. He gave me a brief, careful hug, the kind that asked permission before it offered comfort. I hugged him back without thinking, breathing in the clean, familiar scent of him. Soap and something warm, like fresh bread. "Dolores, this is Mr. Hanley," Thomas said, stepping aside. Mr. Hanley was older, with a thick white beard and kind, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He wore a battered cardigan over a t-shirt that said, "Support your local bookstore or die trying." "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked me over for a second, then smiled. "You look like someone who loves books more than people. You'll fit right in." Relief made me laugh softly. "Yeah, that's probably true." We talked for a little while. Nothing serious, just basic stuff. He asked if I could work a register, if I could lift a box of books without needing a hospital trip, if I could be polite even when customers were rude. I said yes to everything because I could. I had done much harder things for a lot less. "You start tomorrow," Mr. Hanley said, finally, scribbling something on a sticky note and handing it to me. 9 a.m. Bring coffee if you want to bribe me into liking you faster." "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than he probably realized. As we walked back to the car, Shannon kept glancing at me like she was waiting for me to say something, but I was still letting it sink in. I had a job, a real job, something to get up for, something that wasn't about surviving someone else's bad moods. In the car, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "See? I told you things were going to start looking up." I smiled, a real one this time. "Yeah, you were right." Thomas leaned against the passenger door, looking back at me. "Proud of you," he said simply. Something about the way he said it, without pity, without expectation, made my chest tighten. I looked out the window so he wouldn't see how much it meant. That night, back at Shannon's apartment, we made spaghetti and watched terrible reality TV until we was both half asleep on the couch. I thought I'd be too wired to sleep, but when I crawled under the blanket again, exhaustion pulled me under fast. But sometime after midnight, I woke up. The room was dark, except for the streetlights outside, casting pale gold stripes across the walls. I lay there, blinking, trying to figure out what had woken me. Then I realized. It wasn't a noise. It was the quiet. No Glenn yelling in the next room. No slamming doors. No ugly fights brewing under every casual word. Just the hum of the fridge, the soft purr of Shannon's cat, the distant rumble of a car passing by. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself and let the silence sink in. It wasn't lonely. It wasn't empty. It was mine. And somewhere deep in my bones, I knew this was just the beginning. Morning came fast, with the alarm on my phone buzzing against the couch cushion. For a second, I just lay there, groggy, caught between the comfort of sleep and the new reality waiting for me. Then I remembered the bookstore, the job, my second chance. I got up quietly, not wanting to wake Shannon, and tiptoed into the tiny bathroom. I pulled my hair into a low ponytail, splashed cold water on my face, and threw on jeans and a clean black t-shirt. Simple, safe. It felt like armor, somehow, even if it was just cotton and denim. By the time I finished, Shannon was shuffling into the kitchen, half asleep, wearing a hoodie that said, "Monday is a scam. Kill it today," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes and grabbing a coffee mug. I grinned and blew her a kiss before slipping out the door. The walk to Page Turner's wasn't far. The morning was brisk, and I tucked my hands deep into my pockets, feeling the nervous buzz under my skin. What if I wasn't good enough? What if I messed up? The doubts whispered at me like they always did, but I kept moving forward anyway. When I pushed open the door, Mr. Hanley was already behind the counter, a half-eaten donut sitting next to a steaming coffee cup. He looked up and gave me a small, approving nod. Right on time. That's a good start. I smiled shyly and made my way over. The morning went by in a steady rhythm. Mr. Hanley showed me how to work the register, how to sort the new arrivals, how to gently tell customers we didn't have a bathroom for public use without getting yelled at. I listened carefully, wanting so badly to prove that I wasn't just another broken mess drifting through life. Around noon, the front door chimed, and I looked up automatically. That's when I saw him, Glenn. He stood there like a ghost from a life I thought I had buried. His hair was messy, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, swept the store until they landed on me. For a second, neither of us moved. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs, I thought it might crack them. He walked toward me, slow, almost unsure, but there was still that smug tilt to his mouth that made my skin crawl. "Dolores," he said, like he was tasting the word, like it belonged to him. I stepped back without thinking, bumping into the edge of the counter. Mr. Hanley looked up from his paperwork and raised an eyebrow. "Problem?" I shook my head quickly. "No, sir, everything's fine." Glenn smiled wider, sensing the lie. "I was just looking for you," he said. "You didn't even leave a note. Nothing." His voice was low, almost casual, but there was a sharpness underneath it, a warning. I knew that tone too well. "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice steady, even though my hands were trembling slightly at my sides. He blinked, like he hadn't expected me to say it, like he still thought he had some kind of hold over me. "You're being dramatic," he said, laughing under his breath. "Come on, Dolores, you're not built for this. You don't even know how to be alone." I stared at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt pity. He needed me to be small. He needed me to need him. Without that, he had nothing. "I'm not alone," I said quietly. "I'm just free." Something flickered in his eyes then, something ugly and furious. But before he could say anything else, Mr. Hanley stood up from behind the counter, looking every inch the grumpy old man, ready to throw out the trash. "You heard the lady," he said. "Store policy says no harassing the staff. Time to go." Glenn hesitated, his fists clenching at his sides. But Mr. Hanley just stared him down like he was a cockroach on his floorboards. After a long, tense moment, Glenn turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Mr. Hanley sat back down, picking up his coffee like nothing had happened. "You're tougher than you look, kid." I swallowed hard, feeling the shakes start in my hands, now that the danger was over. "Thank you," I whispered. He just grunted and went back to his paperwork, like saving scared girls from their pasts was just another part of the job. For the rest of the afternoon, I worked like my life depended on it. Every book I shelved, every customer I smiled at, every register button I pressed felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. Glenn's shadow hovered for a while, but it got smaller as the hours passed. Less important, less real. By the time Shannon showed up to walk me home, carrying 2 giant iced coffees and a wicked grin, I felt like I had survived something important. I wasn't the girl who needed rescuing anymore. I was the girl who walked away and didn't look back. That night, sitting cross-legged on Shannon's couch, I flipped through my old notebook again. The edges were frayed, and there were coffee stains on half the pages. But it felt like holding a piece of my heart in my hands. A younger, hopeful version of myself had filled it with lists of dreams, places to visit, things to learn, the kind of life I wanted to build someday. Someday had always felt far away, but maybe someday had just finally started. Shannon was in the kitchen, laughing at something on her phone while reheating leftovers. The apartment smelled like garlic bread and tomatoes, cozy and warm. It was so far from the cold, bitter nights I'd spent trying to make myself small enough not to set Glenn off. Here, I didn't have to tiptoe. Here, I didn't have to apologize for existing. "You should think about going back to school," Shannon said casually, as she plopped down next to me with 2 steaming bowls. She handed me one and nudged me with her knee. "You used to talk about it all the time, remember?" I stirred my pasta slowly, thinking I had wanted that once. To study literature, maybe even teach one day. But Glenn had laughed at the idea every time it came up. "What's the point?" he'd say. "You're not smart enough for that crap anyway." I hadn't even realized how deep those words had buried themselves until now. "I don't know if I can afford it," I said, not meeting her eyes. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," she said. "Just let yourself want it again." It's allowed. Let myself want. It sounded so simple when she said it, but it shook something loose in me. Later, after we ate and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I sat by the window with my notebook open, a pen in my hand. The city hummed softly outside. Distant sirens, laughter spilling from a bar down the street, the whisper of a world still moving. I pressed the pen to the paper, hesitating. Then I wrote, "Things I want, my own apartment, a bookshelf filled with my favorite books, a cat and rolling community college, travel even just once, to feel proud when I look in the mirror." The list was short, a little shaky, but it was mine, and for the first time in forever, it felt like a promise instead of a fantasy. The next few days passed in a strange, steady rhythm. Mornings at the bookstore, sorting through endless boxes of books, helping customers find the perfect novel for their weekend escape. Afternoons back at Shannon's, curled up with takeout or cheap coffee, laughing about nothing, making up ridiculous plans for the future. Thomas dropped by sometimes too, always bringing little things, a new notepad for me, a weird bookmark shaped like a sloth. Once, a tiny, potted cactus he said was low maintenance, like you need right now. Every time he showed up, that strange flutter in my chest came back. And every time, I shoved it down. It was too soon. I wasn't ready. Not yet. One evening while Shannon was working late, Thomas stopped by with 2 sandwiches and a 6-pack of the cheap beer he knew I secretly liked. We sat on the fire escape outside the apartment, legs dangling into the cooling night, the metal bars creaking under us. "You're doing good, you know," he said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. I shrugged. "Some days I still feel like I'm going to fall apart." He took a sip of his beer. "Falling apart isn't the worst thing that can happen." I looked at him sideways. He was watching the street below, his face lit by the glow of a street lamp, and I wondered if he knew how much sense he made without even trying. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "you gotta fall apart so you can rebuild the right way." We sat there until the city got quieter, until the stars poked tiny holes through the dark sky. Neither of us said much after that. We didn't need to. It wasn't a perfect night. I wasn't magically healed. I didn't have all the answers, but I had something small and stubborn inside me again. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start over. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows, soft and golden. I sat at the little kitchen table, coffee cooling in front of me, staring at the open browser on Shannon's old laptop. The community college website blinked at me like it was daring me to do something. Application deadlines were close. There was a cheap night class for literature, starting in just a few weeks. It wasn't much, but it was something that belonged to me. I chewed on the end of the pen in my hand, nerves twisting in my stomach. It felt stupid to be scared of a form, but it wasn't just a form. It was admitting that I believed in myself. Even a little. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Thomas. "You're braver than you think. Just saying." I didn't know how he always seemed to know when I was about to back down, but somehow he always did. Smiling a little, I clicked on the application button and started filling it out. Name, address, emergency contact. I hesitated. When it asked for employment, for so long I had nothing to put there. Now I typed carefully. Part-time employee, Page Turner's bookstore. It felt ridiculously good to see it written out by the time Shannon shuffled into the kitchen, yawning and rubbing her eyes. I had hit submit. "It's done?" she asked, her voice still scratchy with sleep. I nodded, heart hammering. "It's done." She whooped and wrapped me in a tight, squeaky hug. The kind of hug that made you believe you really were doing something good. We celebrated that night with greasy pizza and old movies, laughing too loud and drinking soda, straight from the bottle like kids. For a while, it was easy to forget how hard it had been to get here. But not everything could stay soft and easy. A few days later, while I was shelving new arrivals at the store, I heard the door chime again. I glanced up, expecting a regular, maybe the sweet old lady who always asked for mystery novels. Instead, it was Shannon. And she wasn't smiling. She walked straight over to me, phone clutched in her hand, her face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked, already feeling my stomach drop. She hesitated, then held out her phone. It was a picture of me, standing on the fire escape with Thomas, laughing, beer in hand, and the caption underneath, posted on some awful gossip page by a fake account, "Didn't take her long to move on. Some girls are just cheap no matter where they land. Glenn's poison." It had to be. The room spun a little, and I had to grab the shelf to steady myself. "I'm so sorry," Shannon whispered. "I thought you should see it before someone else did." I stared at the screen, the old shame rising in my chest like bile. That familiar voice whispered again, "You're not enough. You'll never be enough." I could feel customers nearby, could feel the weight of their eyes, real or imagined. Suddenly, I wasn't the new girl with a second chance. I was the girl who got called cheap in public, again. I shoved the phone back into Shannon's hands and forced myself to breathe. Mr. Hanley, from behind the counter, called out, "Everything all right over there?" I swallowed hard. I could fall apart right here. I could run home and hide under the covers and let Glenn win, or I could stay. I straightened up, wiped my palms on my jeans, and called back, "All good, sir." Then I turned to Shannon, forcing a tight, shaky smile. "Come on, help me sort these romance novels." Apparently, I'm an expert now. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded fiercely. We worked side by side in silence, and every book I shelved felt like a punch back at all the people who wanted me to crumble. Glenn could post 1,000 lies if he wanted. I wasn't cheap, wasn't weak. I was still standing, and that mattered more than any cruel word ever would. By the time my shift ended, the worst of the shaking had faded, but a hollow ache remained. Shannon offered to drive me home, but I shook my head. I needed the walk. I needed the air. The evening streets were alive with people, couples holding hands, kids riding bikes, friends laughing over coffee outside tiny cafes. It felt like the whole world was moving forward, while I was stuck dragging Glenn's lies behind me like heavy chains. Halfway back to Shannon's, I ducked into a narrow alleyway between two brick buildings and slid down against the wall. The bricks were cool against my back. I stared up at the slice of twilight sky above me and let the weight of it all settle. For a long time, I thought if I just left Glenn, if I just got out, everything would magically get better. But no one warned me that sometimes the ghosts followed you, that sometimes it wasn't just about leaving him. It was about clawing his voice out of your own head, cheap. Not good enough. Lucky anyone even wants you. The words looped, sharp and ugly. I hugged my knees to my chest and closed my eyes, breathing deep, trying to find something inside me that was still solid. Still mine. That's when I heard footsteps. Soft ones. Careful ones. I opened my eyes and saw Thomas standing there, a plastic bag from the corner store dangling from his hand. He crouched down slowly, not saying anything at first, just watching me like he was making sure I wasn't about to bolt. "I saw the post," he said finally, voice low. Of course he did. Everyone probably had by now. "I'm fine," I said too quickly, the words brittle. He nodded, like he didn't believe me, but wasn't going to push. Instead, he pulled something out of the bag. A cheap, ridiculous candy bar. The kind I once confessed was my guilty pleasure during a late-night conversation months ago. He held it out without a word, stared at it for a second, then gave a wet, broken laugh. It escaped before I could stop it. He smiled. That quiet, patient smile that never asked for anything in return. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. Not strong, not okay, not anything. I swallowed hard. The candy bar, blurring behind tears I didn't want to shed. "I hate that he still gets in my head," I whispered. "I hate that some stupid post can still make me feel like I'm nothing." Thomas sat down beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. His warmth was solid and steady, grounding me. "That's not weakness," he said. "That's just healing. It's messy, it's ugly sometimes, but it's real." We sat there as the sky darkened, the city buzzing around us like some other distant world. I didn't know how long we stayed like that, just breathing, just existing. But at some point, I realized the sharp edge of panic had dulled. The hurt was still there, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. When I finally stood up, my legs were stiff, but I felt lighter somehow, less haunted. Thomas grinned and tossed the candy bar. At me, I caught it clumsily. "You coming?" he asked, nodding toward the street. I looked down at the candy in my hand, then back at him, standing there like the universe was offering me a second chance. Not just at surviving, but at living. I smiled. A real one. Shaky, but real. "Yeah," I said. "I'm coming." And as we walked back toward the lights and noise of the city, toward the people who cared about me, toward the life I was still figuring out how to build, I realized something important. Glenn could shout into the void all he wanted. He could call me cheap, call me worthless, call me whatever helped him sleep at night, but he didn't get to write my story anymore. I did. And for the first time in a long time, I was damn sure it was going to be a good one. The next few weeks rolled by like waves. Some calm, some crashing. But through it all, I kept showing up at the bookstore, at Shannon's messy kitchen table, at my own life. Page turners became more than just a job. It became my little sanctuary, a place where people saw me, not as someone broken, not as someone pitied, just as Dolores, the girl who knew exactly where to find the best secondhand mystery novel, or who could make a grumpy old customer crack a smile. Mr. Henley even started, leaving me little post-it notes on the counter. "Great sale today. You're a natural. Next time you alphabetize, double-check the J author's kid." Each one meant more than he probably realized. At night, I would pull out my course catalog and circle classes in red ink, letting myself imagine a future where I was more than just surviving, where I was building. And Thomas became this quiet, steady part of my days. Sometimes he dropped by the store with fresh coffee. Sometimes he showed up on my lunch breaks with those cheap candy bars tucked into his jacket pocket. Like a secret between us, he never pushed, never asked for anything. He just stayed. And in a life full of people who had only ever wanted to tear me down or change me, that felt like something rare, something precious. Still, there was this part of me that stayed cautious, wary, a small, battered voice that whispered, "Don't trust it. Don't trust yourself." One Friday evening after closing, I sat on the counter flipping through my notebook. Thomas leaned against the other side, arms crossed, watching me with that unreadable look he always got when he was trying not to say too much. "You thinking about it?" he asked. "Thinking about what?" I said. Even though I knew. He shrugged, a half smile tugging at his mouth. "About starting over. Really starting." I closed the notebook slowly. "I'm scared," I admitted, the words rough but honest. "Good," he said simply. "Means it's real." For a long moment, we just looked at each other, the bookstore around us settling into soft creaks and fading light. "You deserve to be happy, Dolores," he said, voice low and sure. "You don't have to earn it. You don't have to prove anything. You just do." Tears stung at the back of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I wasn't going to cry over kindness. Not tonight. Instead, I slid off the counter, standing close enough to feel the warmth coming off him. "Stay for a bit?" I asked, voice almost a whisper. He smiled, slow and real, and nodded. We ended up sitting on the floor between two towering shelves, eating leftover cookies from the cafe next door, talking about everything and nothing until the stars climbed high above the city, and somewhere between laughing over some terrible joke he made and stealing another cookie from the box, I realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to call me names, to make me doubt myself, to tear me down. I had already lived through the worst of it, and I was still here. The next morning I woke, early. The city outside was still sleepy. Washed in soft pink and gold light, I sat at the little desk Shannon had shoved into a corner for me, turned on her old creaky laptop, and pulled up the community college enrollment page. With shaking hands, I selected my class. I entered my information. I clicked confirm. It was done. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen, heart pounding, not from fear, from possibility. In the silence of the early morning, in the messy warmth of a borrowed apartment filled with love and hope and second chances, I finally let myself believe it. I wasn't cheap, wasn't broken, I wasn't a mistake, I was Dolores, and my story was just beginning, the end.